There you go. I'm live. So hi, everyone. I am here reading, I thought it was just me, but it isn't, chapter 4. So we're going on with the book. So I invite you to go ahead and sit back, relax. You can just sit back and listen to the book any way. You can fast forward, whatever you want to do to it. So as always, I might mess up some of the words. Hopefully I don't. But you'll get the gist of the book. So we're on chapter 4, which is page 92. This is called The Second Element, Practicing Critical Awareness. A couple of years ago, I was given a noontime lecture to a large group of medical students, residents, and medical faculty. During these daily lectures, pharmaceutical companies or other sponsors often provide lunch to the attendees. About 20 minutes into my talk on shame and health, I started explaining the concept of critical awareness. Very quickly, I noticed a swelling wave of lost faces. I looked out on the audience, almost all of whom were busy eating, and abruptly asked, "How's the pizza?" Everyone stopped chewing, leaned forward in their chairs, and stared back at me with blank expressions on their faces. I pointed to a long table of empty pizza boxes and said, "I'm aware that there were pizzas on that table and that most of you took a couple of slices on your way to your seat. That's awareness." They looked very unimpressed. Then I said, "I'm also aware that you have very little time for lunch and that the drug company's sales rep is offering lunch as an incentive to get you to attend this presentation. If there were no pizza, you probably wouldn't be here. If you weren't here, you wouldn't get to hear me talk. But more importantly, you wouldn't get the pen and the pad that has the drug company's newest logo on it, and patients wouldn't see you carrying that pen and so on. That's critical awareness." They turned and looked at one another, then looked back at me, and in unison looked down at their plates. I smiled. Awareness is knowing something exists. Critical awareness is knowing why it exists, how it works, how our society is impacted by it, and who benefits from it. I think they started to get it. The concept of critical awareness is sometimes called critical consciousness or critical perspective. It's the belief that we can increase personal power by understanding the link between our personal experiences and larger social systems. When we look at the shame category, appearance and body image, motherhood, family, parenting, money and work, mental and physical health, sex, aging, religion, being stereotyped and labeled, speaking out and surviving trauma, most of us have not been taught how to see the connection between our private lives and social, political, and economic influences. Shame works like the zoom lens on a camera. When we are feeling shame, the camera is zoomed in tight, and all we see is our flawed selves, alone and struggling. We think to ourselves, "I'm the only one. Something is wrong with me. I am alone." When we zoom out, we start to see a completely different picture. We see many people in the same struggle. Rather than thinking, "I'm the only one," we start thinking, "I can't believe it. You too? I'm normal. I thought it was just me." Again, but it isn't. Once we start to see the big picture, we are better able to reality check our shame triggers and the social community expectations that fuel shame. I think the best way to learn critical awareness is to apply the concept to a real issue. And let's start by the issue of appearance and body image. I like to use this issue as an example because it's almost a universal shame trigger. To begin to understand the big picture, we need to ask the following big picture questions about appearance. What are the social community expectations around appearances? Why do these expectations exist? How do these expectations work? How is our society influenced by these expectations? And who benefits from these expectations? While each of us would probably have specific answers to these questions based on our age, race, ethnicity, for the purposes of this example, I'm going to respond with broad general answers. First, what are the social community expectations of appearance? From a societal level, appearances include everything from hair, skin, makeup, weight, clothing, shoes, nails, attitude, confidence, age, and wealth. If you pile on community-specific expectations, you might have to add things like hair texture, hair length, skin, color, face, body hair, teeth, looking done up, not looking done up, clothing, and jewelry. Why do appearance expectations exist? I would say they exist to keep us spending our valuable resources, money, time, and energy on trying to meet some ideal that is not achievable. Think about this. Americans spend more each year on beauty than we do on education. How does it work? I think the expectations are both obvious and subtle. They are everything we see and everything we don't see. If you read a fashion magazine or watch TV, you know what you're supposed to look like and how you're supposed to dress and act. If you look hard enough, you also see everything that's missing, the images of real people. If you combine what's there and what's missing, you quickly come to believe that if you don't look a certain way, you become invisible. You don't matter. What is the impact of these expectations? Well, let's see. About 80 million Americans are obese. Approximately 7 million girls and women suffer from an eating disorder. Up to 19% of college-age women are bulimic. I know this book was written a couple of years ago, but I'm sure that's higher now, and I'm sure men are included too. Eating disorders are the third most common chronic illness among females. The latest surveys show very young girls are going on diets because they think they are fat and unattractive. In one American survey, 81% of 10-year-old girls had already dieted at least once. A research survey found that the single largest group of high school students considered or attempted suicide are girls who feel they're overweight. 25 years ago, top models and beauty queens weighed only 8% less than the average women. Now they weigh 23% less. The current media ideal for women is achievable by less than 5% of the female population, and that's just in terms of weight and size. Among women over 18 looking at themselves in the mirror, research indicates that at least 80% are unhappy with what they see. Many will not even be seeing an accurate reflection. Most of us have heard that people with anorexia see themselves as larger than they really are, but some recent research indicates that this kind of distorted body image is by no means confined to those suffering from eating disorders. In some studies, up to 80% of women overestimated their size. Increasing number of women with no weight problems or clinical psychological disorders look at themselves in the mirror and see ugliness and fat. And they're starting to look at how women and men are seeing themselves on Zoom, and they're actually looking for different things that they can do to change their appearance because they don't like the way they look on Zoom. According to the American Society for Plastic Surgery, since 1997, there's been a 465% increase in the total number of cosmetic procedures. Women had nearly 10.7 million cosmetic procedures, 90% of the total. The number of cosmetic procedures for women have increased 49% since 2003. The top 5 surgical procedures for women were liposuction, breast augmentation, eyelid surgery, tummy tuck, and facelift. Americans spend just under $12.5 billion on cosmetic procedures since 2004. Who benefits from the appearance expectations? So let's see. The $38 billion hair industry, the $33 billion dye, $18 billion makeup industry, $15 billion perfume industry, and $13 billion cosmetic surgery industry. That's a whole bunch of folks to see and believe messages that sell the social community expectations of appearance. If we don't believe we're too fat, ugly, and old, then they don't sell their products. If they don't sell their products, they don't make their house payment, and the pressure is on. When we ask and answer these big picture questions, we begin to develop critical awareness. The next step is learning how to use this information to reality check our shame triggers. We do that by looking at our shame triggers and asking these 6 reality check questions. How realistic are my expectations? Can I be all these things all of the time? Do the expectations conflict with each other? Am I describing who I want to be or who others want me to be? If somebody perceives me as having these unwanted identities, what will happen? And can I control how others perceive me? And how do I try? Hold that thought for a minute. During our second interview, Jillian shared her answers to these reality check questions with me. Jillian's ideal identities are thin, sexy, confident, natural, and young. Her unwanted identities are middle-aged, tired, fat, and frumpy. And here's how she answered these questions. How realistic are my expectations? Not realistic at all. I'm middle-aged and I'm tired a lot. I don't always look tired, but you can't change my age. The truth is that I'm not going to look thin and sexy all the time. When I first started this process, I thought it was realistic, but the more I learn about the expectations I put on myself and the images I measure myself against, the more I realize that I literally can't have that. The girls in these magazines are 16 or maybe 20 at the oldest. I might be able to feel sexy and fit, but I won't look it by the movie standards. The truth is that it's not okay to look 40. It's okay to be 40 as long as you look like you're about 25 or 30. I saw a commercial the other day where the model says, I don't mind being my age, I just don't want to look it. Why not? If she said, hey, America, this is what 40 looks like, then we'd all want to look our age. Can I be all these things all of the time? No, I can't. I do look good sometimes. I'm proud of how I look every now and then. But I'm still hard on myself because I don't look great all the time. I'll be at home with my gown and slippers on and my hair pulled back and think, what a slob. Even then, I think I should have on Victoria's Secret lingerie. I'm starting to hate those commercials. I'm starting to hate all the commercials. I'm starting to hate the television. Sorry, she says the television, but I was just thinking commercials. But actually, it's the TV shows too. Anyways, do the expectations conflict with each other? Yes. This was the most eye-opening question for me. I can't look confident when I'm afraid that people will think I'm fat and frumpy. And I don't look so natural when my girdle is squeezing the life out of me. I also think about fake tanning. It's so cold here 6 months out of the year. When spring comes, everyone wants to look tan. By summer, everyone is bright orange from the tanning beds. That's not very natural. You can't pretend to be natural and confident. I admire the women who say, I'm 50 and this is what I look like. Take it or leave it. I'm 50 and this is what I look like. Take it or leave it. Am I describing who I want to be or who others want me to be? Some of both. I want to be confident and natural and want people to describe me that way. I don't care as much about being sexy and thin. I want to be healthy, but I think I want to look young and sexy because you are supposed to be those things. I've talked a lot about this with my husband. He doesn't make comments very much anymore. When I talked to him about it, he was shocked about how much it hurt me. My mother-in-law is still pretty judgmental. If someone perceives me as having these unwanted identities, what will happen? At one time, I would have said that I would be embarrassed if I thought people saw me as fat, frumpy, and old. Now I know that it's shame. I guess nothing will happen. I just feel more fun. I would just feel made fun of or ridiculed. But truthfully, I don't think anyone would say that about me except for me. That's a really powerful statement that sometimes we say the meanest things about ourselves to ourselves. Can I control how others perceive me? And how do I try? Before I learned about shame, I thought I can control how others perceive me. Now I know that no one can. So my answer is cheating a little. I really do believe that you can control perception if you stay on top of it. Now I know that's a no-win situation. I don't try as much as I used to, but I still fall back into that thinking. I used to try to control it by not getting myself in situations where I'd be judged. I wouldn't swim at the parties, so I'd stay in my shorts, but then they'd judge you for that. No matter what you do, you can't control how other people see you. As you read Jillian's answers, you can see that reality checking our shame triggers is not easy. And it's almost impossible if we don't have some sense of the big picture. Jillian has certainly zoomed out around her appearance issues in the media. She doesn't just see herself as flawed and incapable of meeting reasonable expectations. She knows what she's up against. It's all women versus a huge beauty industry that's very effective at making us feel bad about ourselves. She seems to have a good sense about how her triggers work and how they affect her. During our second interview, Jillian said, "It's tiring. You can't just know this stuff and think about it once or twice. You have to constantly remind yourself or you get sucked back in. It's hard, especially when the people around you just don't get it." Jillian's right. This element is called practicing critical awareness. If we only ask and answer the questions, we are likely to feel stuck, angry, and overwhelmed. It's bad enough that we are under immense pressure to be unattainably beautiful, but when we learn that this pressure is supported by the weight of a multi-billion-dollar industry, we could feel defeated and resigned. Practicing critical awareness means linking our personal experience to what we learn from the questions and answers. When we do this, we move towards resiliency by learning how to, one, contextualize, I see the bigger picture, normalizing, I'm not the only one, and demystifying, I'll share what I know with others. When we fail to make these connections, we increase our shame by reinforcing, individualizing, and pathologizing. When we practice critical awareness, we just demystify, contextualize, and normalize. And it shows a little diagram on the bottom. Individualizing, I am the only one. Pathologizing, something's wrong with me. Reinforcing, I should be ashamed. I always find examples helpful, especially when I'm trying to get my head around some new concept. So in this chapter, I've included how Suzanne, Kayla, Teresa, and Sandra answered these big picture and reality check questions. Understanding the big picture often requires us to investigate issues. For example, the list of beauty facts and statistics early in this chapter all came from books or the internet. I really encourage you to do your own detective work. It can be very empowering. Of course, you'll want to make sure that you are pulling information from a reputable source, especially on the internet. But there are many individuals and organizations doing wonderful work on exposing how social community expectations impact the way we think, feel, and act. On my own website, www.brenebrown.com, I have critical awareness resource for all of the shame categories, including exercises, links, and list of recommended books. During a recent workshop, one woman told the larger group that she struggles with serious shame issues over money. After the workshop, she came up to me and said, rather than shopping, I'm going to spend my time investigating how credit card debt hurts women. Right on. Let's look at how Susan, Kayla, Teresa, and Sandra applied the principles of critical awareness to their situations. After Susan answered the big picture and reality check question, she wrote, I'm surprised to find myself in this big motherhood war. I didn't think this would happen to me. I'm not a very political person, and I don't really have strong opinions one way or the other when it comes to working or staying at home. I had no idea my decision, which is very personal, to go back to work part-time, would spark such emotions in my sister. She went on to say, I'm not sure who benefits from all of this pressure. It's certainly not mothers, Susan said. I had no idea until I wrote it down how much I worried about what other people think. I know I'm a good, committed mom. Why do I care if people see it or not? In her final thoughts, Susan told me that the most difficult thing for her was letting go of the idea that she could control how people see her, especially her mother and sister. I just kept working to convince them that this is a good decision for me and our family. I want them to change how they see it. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I have no control over it, and that's hard. Kayla read over both sets of critical awareness questions and wrote down one simple but powerful sentence. I have bought into the messages that are being used to shame me. She explained that she cared what Nancy, her boss, thought and said because she looked up to her in her tough approach about mixing business and family. Kayla said, "No one benefits from this. No one. Everyone has a life outside of work, and that life can be hard. It's not just hard on women either. There was a guy whose child was sick, and it got so stressful for him that he quit. I felt bad for him when it happened, but not enough to say anything. I asked her if the company benefits from this informal policy, and after thinking about it for a minute, she said, no, not really. Everyone is too stressed. That guy who quit to take care of his son was awesome. We needed him, and now he's gone. Maybe people think it's good for the bottom line, but it's not." Kayla told me her next step was to actually consider leaving for another agency. She said, "It might be the same competitive culture everywhere I go, but I could start over with new boundaries and new expectations." Teresa had a difficult time with these questions. She explained, "I just don't know if I'm making excuses for how I feel or doing something that's going to make me feel better. I can't stop thinking that some better, more put together version of what I have is possible," she said. "One thing is clear. I definitely can't be as stressed and overwhelmed as I am now and have a family that's fun-loving, laid back, and happy." Even though Teresa and her mom had a distant relationship, she told me that she thinks she sometimes judges her family through her mother's eyes. "My constant disappointment in my life wears on my husband and our marriage. It's hard on my kids. They certainly don't care about being more perfect. They just want to be more happy. They just want to be happy. I'm pushing these expectations. My mom is in my head." When Sandra examined how her experience of speaking out fit in the big picture in her community, she came across a complicated intersection of race and gender. She said, on the one hand, Black women are respected for being strong and assertive. This is especially true when we're dealing with white folk. But when it comes to Black men, we're supposed to back down. I don't think that Don believes that, but certainly my husband and in-laws don't think I'm showing him enough respect when I challenge his opinions. Sandra went on to say that she believes this takes a toll on Black women and girls. She said, "I can't be superhuman sometimes and then back down others. I'm really somewhere in the middle." As she used these ideas to reality check her ideal perspective, she wrote, "All of these expectations keep me quiet. If I'm not perfect, I can't speak. I need to be okay with being wrong. I need to be allowed to say, I don't know. I also need to be okay with asserting myself. Sometimes it's as hard to be right as it is to be wrong." In the next sections, we'll explore the strategy that moves us towards resilience and the common barriers that stand in our way. Contextualizing versus individualizing. The word context is derived from the Latin word contextual, meaning to weave or twine together. When we understand the context of an experience, we see the big picture. It goes back to the zoom lens. When we are in shame, we just see our own struggles. As we zoom out, we start to see others engage in similar struggles. When we pull completely back, we start to see an even bigger picture, how political, economic, and social forces shape our personal experiences. Contextualizing is the key to making the shame connection. If I understand how industries and individuals benefit from my appearance shame, does this mean the shame goes away? No, unfortunately not. But identifying the context in which we feel shame helps us build resilience. If we feel shame because despite our best efforts, we can't look like the model on the cover of a magazine, it helps to know that the model probably doesn't look like that either. Her blemishes are airbrushed, her legs are stretched using a computer. Her smile is whitened and her clothes are borrowed. Magazines make money, by selling advertising space, not subscriptions. The goal is to have us look at the women on the cover, feel bad, and then buy all the lotions and potions advertised in the magazine. If we buy a lot of the products, the cosmetic company buys more advertising space in the magazine, and so on and so on and so on. If we buy into the whole package of what we're supposed to look like and think we can't achieve that look only because we don't have enough willpower or genetic advantage, we sink into shame. Context helps us understand how social, community expectations, economics, and politics are all woven together to produce one cohesive image. We can't unravel the truth without recognizing the threads. As the categories indicated, many of us actually fall prey to the same sources of shame, and we experience very similar reactions. However, due to the isolating and secretive nature of shame, we feel like it's only happening to us and that we must hide it at all costs. This, in turn, has led to our false belief that shame is a personal problem, even a psychological defect of some kind, and it's not. Yes, shame can lead to personal problems and even play a role in mental illness, but shame is also a social construct. It happens between people. Shame is how I feel when I see myself through someone else's eyes. I've labeled shame a psychosocial cultural construct. I like to explain it this way. If you stick shame under a psychological microscope, you'll only see part of the picture. If you do the same with a social lens or cultural lens, same outcome. You'll only see pieces of the problem. If, however, you combine all three of these lenses, the psychological, social, and cultural, you get the full picture of shame. I think the most dangerous view is looking at shame strictly as a personal problem. When we do that, we seek only personal and highly individualized solutions, which leave the layers of competing and conflicting expectations that drive shame intact and unchanged. If 1 or 2 or even 100 women said they were ashamed of their bodies, that probably wouldn't point to a larger social connection. But it wasn't just a few women. It was more than 90% of the women I interviewed. If it was just Sandra who talked about the fear of experiencing shame when she voiced her opinion or spoke out in public or private issues, then speaking out wouldn't be a shame category. It's a category because a strong pattern emerged across the interviews indicating that a significant number of women remained quiet rather than deal with their fear of being put down and ridiculed or appearing stupid. The myth of shrieking and blaming. Shrinking? Many people mistake contextualizing for a means to shrink our personal responsibilities and blame the system. For example, it's not my fault I can't find a job, it's because I'm a woman. It's not my fault that I can't lose weight, it's the diet industry. It's not my fault that I'm in debt, it's the evil credit card companies. I think contextualizing is the opposite of blaming and shrinking. When the women I interviewed talked about the importance of getting the big picture, they didn't talk about making excuses. They talked about finding the power to make changes by understanding the big picture and knowing they weren't the only ones struggling. During my senior year, my mom made me join a group with other girls with Trich. At first, I was really pissed. I didn't even believe that other girls had it. In this group, I found out that several million people have it. It didn't make it go away, but at least I know other people, and I'm not a total freak. There was even a girl 3 years younger than me, and I was able to help her by telling her how I explained it to my friends. Note, Trich is short for, and I'm not even trying it, an impulse control disorder that causes people to pull out body hair, skin, head, eyebrows, eyelashes, etc. It seems to occur most frequently in pre or early adolescent years. I'm one of those people who have had a lot of fear about rape. I'm very proud of things like sexual I'm very aware of things like sexual assault, and no means no. I support that and I believe in it, but I feel a lot of shame because when I think about hot sex, or when I imagine something to make me more excited or more into sex, those are the kind of fantasies and scenarios I think about in my head. I think about these scenes in the movies where girls say, no, 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 and then it turns into great hot sex. What is that all about? How can that be our biggest fear in real life, but it also be a big fantasy? I asked my older sister about it, and she said it's because you never see gentle, loving, vulnerable sex in the movies. She said no one would buy tickets. She said people want to see forbidden or fearful sex, and after a while you start believing that's what it takes to have good sex. I asked her if I was normal, and she said a lot of people buy into that, but no one talks about it because it's shameful. She said the dangerous part is men also believe that women like to be forced. I think you grow up feeling shame about the stuff your parents didn't allow you to talk about when you were little. So anything that a parent makes off limits, that's the shit that's going to make you crazy when you get older. If you want your kids to be normal, let them talk about everything. Then they won't have any shame around it. Then it's not just a big deal anymore. If you grew up with a lot of off-limit things, you'll have to ask people and figure it all out. The more you know, the more you realize you're not the only one. When we strive to understand the context or the big picture, we don't give up responsibility, we increase it. When we identify a personal struggle that is rooted in larger issues, we should take responsibility for both. Maybe it's not just our job to make things better for ourselves. Maybe we have a responsibility to make things better for our children, our friends, and our community. If we understand how larger systems are contributing to our shame and we choose only to change ourselves, we become as negligent as the person who says, I'm not changing myself because the system is bad. Context is not the enemy of personal responsibility. Individualism is the enemy of personal responsibility. A good example of the importance of context and the collective action is breast cancer. For many of us, there couldn't be a more personal issue, but however personal it is, we still need the big picture. There has been very important advances in breast cancer research over the past 10 years. These advances could not have happened without advocates who recognize the political, social, and economic context of health research. These advocates have pushed breast cancer to the top of the national health agenda, raising millions of dollars and drastically increasing federal funding of breast cancer research. We might be able to make individual choices that lower our risk for breast cancer, but without collective action, we wouldn't know how to manage these risks, and we certainly would not get the level of treatment available today. When we talk about putting issues into context in order to increase our critical awareness, increase our shame resilience, we need to realize that getting mirrored in a blaming system is as destructive as being mirrored in self-blame. The most effective way to change the situation is to look at the big picture, and we individualize a problem. There's little chance that we're going to change it. Normalizing versus pathologizing. When it comes to raising critical awareness and increasing our resilience to shame, the most powerful words we can hear are, "You are not alone." When the research participants talked about critical awareness, the actual words, "You have to find out you're not alone. You need to know you're not alone. You need to find out you're not the only one," came up verbatim in at least 80% of the interviews. Shame works only if we think we're alone in it. If we think there's someone else, a group of women, a city full of women, a country full of women, a world full of women struggling with the same issue, the concept of shame becomes bankrupt. However, unless we understand our shame triggers and practice critical awareness, chances are we're not going to reach out far enough or often enough for someone to have the opportunity to say, "Hey, you're not alone." On the opposite side of the continuum from normalizing is pathologizing. Pathologizing is classifying something as abnormal or deviant. Without critical awareness, we might believe that the social community expectations are attainable. Individually, it is easy for us to believe that we are the only person who doesn't meet the expectations. Therefore, there is something abnormal or deviant about it. If we're going to develop and practice critical awareness, we have to be able to normalize experiences to the point of knowing we're not alone. Driving it home with divorce. I talked to many women who spoke about the shame of divorce. Some women spoke about their own divorces, and other women spoke about their parents' divorces. One thread running through many of the experiences was the economic consequences of divorce. For many women, divorce takes a serious financial toll in addition to the emotional toll. Here are 4 examples. I went from being the perfect mom and the perfect wife to broke, unemployed, and alone. No one calls you poor when you're married and staying at home with your kids, not even when all the money really belongs to your husband. You think his money is our money, and so on. Then one day he leaves and takes everything with him except the kids, thank God. I didn't even know where to mail the mortgage. Now my kids and I live at home with my parents. When you're in your 20s and you move back in with your parents, people think you're lost and trying to find your way. When you're 40 and move back in, everyone thinks you're pathetic. The truth is, we're just lost and trying to find our way. Next example. People tell you not to feel shame for your parents' divorce. That's easier said than done. Try telling your son that his grandparents aren't coming to his bar mitzvah because they can't stand to be in the same place. Who feels that shame? What about begging your father for money so you can fill your mother's prescription? My father always tells me, you're on her side. He just won't understand. He left her with nothing. I'm not on anyone's side, but of course, I'm going to care for my mother. My parents divorced when I was 10. I spent the last 8 years listening to my mom tell me horrible stories about my father. She constantly saying, if he loved you, he'd be more. She's constantly saying, if he loved you, he'd do more for you. He left her in pretty bad shape, but he was also broke. If she had more money, she'd probably get off his back. I love my father. He's a good, decent person and a good dad. She makes me feel ashamed to love him. Ironically, he's the one that makes me feel better about my mom. He never says anything bad about her. He actually defends her sometimes. It's so confusing. I knew we needed to get divorced. He had several affairs and our fights were starting to affect our children. I had this idea in my head that I could start over and make a new life. I thought I can get a small, cute house, a part-time job, and we'd be okay. 6 months after we sold our house, I was $14,000 in debt. I had a job that paid $6 per hour, and I could barely make rent. Rather than helping, my ex-husband suggested he take the kids until I get back on my feet. I was so ashamed that I couldn't take care of my own children. I should have been better than to ever let this happen. I got a second job, but that leaves me with no time to be at home with the boys. They still live with him. Like most women, when I read these stories, I feel some combination of sadness, fear, and the need to protect myself from acknowledging that this could ever happen to me. When we do that, however, we reinforce the stereotypes of women who struggled financially after divorce by individualizing their situation. She brought that on herself. That's a personal problem, not a community problem. And in many ways, we make women out to be flawed, damaged, or somehow abnormal. It's stupid not to know about the family finances. She'd look harder if she really wanted a good job. If we want to develop critical awareness, we start acknowledging the importance of context. Once we have a better understanding of the big picture, we could start linking. What political, social, and economic realities do divorced women face? Here's what we know. Researchers constantly find that women suffer significant economic losses after divorce, much more than their male ex-partners. Researchers agree that a woman's post-divorce income is driven by labor force participation. Women who work, especially those who have an education and can secure high-income jobs, do better after a divorce. Women who have not worked during their marriage face large economic obstacles. 90% of children stay with their mothers. Only 1 in 4 divorced mothers do not have a court-ordered child support award. Among divorced mothers who have a support award, 50% receive the full amount, 25% receive only a part, and 25% receive nothing. Divorced parents, both men and women, are more likely to pay child support if they have an ongoing relationship with their children. Research also shows that the ability for women to financially recover after divorce has increased over the past few years. When we talk to women in my mother's generation, it is easy to understand why many of them suffered great personal and financial losses when they divorced. They didn't participate in the workforce as much as women do today. When they did work, it was often in traditional support or service jobs. If they have had the high status jobs, they were paid much more. If they had high status jobs, they were paid much less than men, and there was no child support laws. As we strive to understand issues in their social, political, and economic context, we are better able to move away from the individualized problems and making them about someone's character flaw. We also become less likely to pathologize women and more likely to understand how and why things work. When we tear down the myths of divorce and really examine the realities and context, we build a new understanding that makes us far more critically aware and far less likely to blame women, including ourselves. Critical awareness also requires us to question this notion of blaming the victim. In particular, some pop psychologists preach that there is no such thing as reality, just perception. Not only is this inaccurate, it's dangerous. Racism is real. Domestic violence is real. Homophobia is real. The economics of divorce are real. When you tell people their situation is only a perception and they can change it, you shame them, belittle them. In the case of domestic violence, you put them in extreme physical danger. Rather than dismissing somebody's experience as perception, we might want to ask, how can I help? Or is there some way I can support you? It might be accurate to say that we all see things differently, but the world trades in both reality and perception. Try paying your mortgage with paper you perceive as money, or try walking out of the store with that Kate Spade's bag and telling the police, it matches my shoes, so I perceive it's mine. That would be kind of funny. Don't try it, but demystifying versus reinforcing. The last benefit of practicing critical awareness is demystifying. If we want to demystify something, we simply break it down and take the mystery out of it. How many times do we see something unusual or interesting, and even if we're dying to know about it, feeling too unworthy to ask about it, how much it cost or how it works? If we start demystifying by asking the critical awareness questions, we often found that the answers are kept secret for a reason. When individuals, groups, or institutes wants to exclude people or raise their status, they have a tendency to shroud themselves, their products, or their ideas in mystery. One example from my life is the mysterious power of getting a PhD. Every semester without fail, I have female students come to my door and, with their heads hanging low, say, I think I might be interested in getting my doctorate, and I don't know that I can really do it, but I'm wondering if you're not too busy, if you could tell me about your experience and how it works. Well, I love getting that question because for me, part of building critical awareness is not only seeking to demystify issues for myself, but helping others do it too. I firmly believe that if we have mysterious powers, if we know how something sacred works, we are obligated to share what we know. Knowledge is power, and power is never diminished by sharing it. It is only increased. My degree doesn't lose value if I help other women figure out how they can get into graduate school. I love peeling the layers of mystery off that process. The opposite of demystifying is reinforcing. Reinforcing is protecting the mystery of something so we can feel more important and secure. I think we're more susceptible to reinforcing when we feel shame around an issue. But when we reinforce, we weave webs that not only entangle other women, but eventually trap us. Here are two sample responses to the question women ask me about applying to graduate school. That's exciting. I'm glad you asked. I'm really nervous about applying, but a couple of people gave me some really good pointers. I'm happy to share what I know. Well, we could talk about the fit between the programs in your interest, because it's very important to develop a strong program of inquiry before you start applying. You want to make sure methodology that your research agenda is compatible with the research agenda of the college and the scholars with whom you will be doing your training. These are actual responses that I received when I asked for help with my graduate application. After the second response, what saved me from shame and yielding to intimidation was my level of acknowledged vulnerability. When I reached out, I knew I was vulnerable. I knew being perceived as not smart enough was a major trigger for me. The research participants frequently discuss the important relationship between understanding their shame triggers, demystifying, and reinforcing. When we don't understand something and not understanding is a shame trigger, we are often too fearful to even ask for an explanation. I've named this the Edamina threat. Edamina, I'm not saying it right. I know I'm not. Is more than a soybean. The word, and I know I have to say it, I just can't think right now, means beans on branch. It's a green vegetable, soybean, that is incorporated into many types of dishes and often eaten as a snack. It's pronounced edamame. Oh, there you go, edamame. The edamame threat is more than a soybean. A couple of years ago, Steve and I went to a dinner party at an acquaintance house. These were new fancy friends, and I was anxious to make a good impression. When we got there, they offered us an appetizer, a big silver bowl of beans. When I first saw them, I thought they were beans that needed to be shucked for dinner. So when they offered them as an appetizer, I'm sure I looked shocked. I said, "Really? What is it?" I've never forgotten the look on their faces. They were absolutely floored. "What do you mean, what is it?" I immediately felt, don't you eat sushi? Then, as if it were both unbelievable and fascinating, I desperately wanted to turn right around and go home. I was filled with shame. A couple of weeks later, I was in my office working and eating some beans. I ended up really liking them. A student knocked on my door and asked if she could come to talk to me about a paper. I'm not sure why the student pushed my buttons, but she did. It was probably because she reminded me of myself when I was in my late 20s, smart, but it's sometimes painfully insecure and necessary. Again, in an attempt to shift shame by putting some of my shame, I said, edamames, of course. "Haven't you ever had one?" She looked embarrassed. "No." I left my office. Why had I done that? Why did I care so much? I'm not a food snob. I have no stake in soybeans. I thought about it for several days before it hit me. I didn't feel shame because I had never tried edamames. I didn't reinforce because it was important for me to feel smarter than the student. I felt shame because for me, not knowing about Japanese foods was a class and culture issue. People at the dinner party were really food elitist. They were the kind of people who travel the world and know all about art and wine. Their title is "Eat Food I Can't Even Pronounce." Hold on. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the class was a major shame trigger for me. That's hard for people to understand at times because I'm a college professor and my husband is a pediatrician. Our professional peers frequently assume that we share the background, but often we don't. When I was in my 20s, I was not eating sushi and studying at Harvard to fulfill my legacy to become an academic. I worked for the phone company and I was a member of the same local union hall that my parents belonged to when they were in their 20s. My parents worked hard to expose us to different culture, music, books, and food, but we were certainly not exposed at the same level as the fancy friends. A few months after the reinforcing incident, Dawn came to Houston for a visit. When it comes to demystifying class issues, she is my go-to girl. When I'm with her, I can ask anything or safely share anything. We came from the same place and we have ended up in the same place. As I started fixing our lunch, I said, "Hey, I'm going to make some edamames. Have you tried it before?" She looked at me and said, "No, but I've heard of it. What is it?" I smiled. "I think it's a Japanese word for soybeans. You boil them, sprinkle them with salt, pop the seeds out and eat them. They're really good. I just had them for the first time a few months ago." Demystifying is a choice. If you know something and you have the opportunity to demystify or reinforce it, you have the opportunity to move along on the shame resilience continuum. When we choose to reinforce, we should ask ourselves why we feel better keeping what we know a mystery. I've told this story in my talks and seminars many times, and I can't tell you how many emails and letters I receive about it. Some of them are just about the general concept of demystifying, but strangely enough, many of the letters are specifically about edamames. One woman wrote in an email, "I've never had an edamame before, and I thought I'd seen it on a menu, and I never wanted to order it because I didn't know how to pronounce it. After reading your story, I laughed, asked a good friend who wouldn't judge me to order some when we were eating sushi and asked her to show me how to eat them. I love the dish now, and I think of you every time I have it. Having come from a very poor Mexican immigrant background, I really relate to your story." Demystifying credentials. During the interview, many women associate shame with education and helping professionals. As an educator, I was not at all surprised to hear shame identified as an issue in the classroom. In fact, I believe that shame is one of the greatest barriers to learning. I'm afraid the social community pressure to appear learned has become more important than actually learning. When we spend our time and energy building and protecting our image of knowing, it is highly unlikely that we will risk admitting we don't understand or asking questions, both of which are essential to real knowledge building. I was, however, shocked to learn that the mere concept of credentials evokes shame in women. Women talked about shame preventing them from returning to school, going to psychotherapy, going to the doctor, visiting the dentist, and even talking to members of the clergy. In this section, I want to share my observations on credentials and how we often turn our power over at the first glance of initials strung behind someone's name. Ooh, very personal topic for me. I hate that stuff. Folks with credentials have three distinct advantages over folks that are working with. One, they have permission to not know. Two, they have permission to not tell. And three, their objective is not questions. Their objectivity is not questions. When most people are asked a question or put on the spot for information, they feel tremendous pressure to come up with an answer. Preferably the right one. If we can't produce an answer or we supply the wrong information, we often feel judged. If we are credentialed, however, we automatically have the right not to know or the right not to answer. Credentials can be excellent get out of jail free cards. For example, in my bachelor's program, an incorrect answer or a no answer reflected my lack of preparation or my lack of knowledge. Most of the time I felt embarrassed, but occasionally I felt shame. But in my master's program, I could reply to the question with a simple, I really don't know. It wasn't the best answer, but more times than not, I was validated for answering honestly. At the doctoral level, if somebody asked me a question that I couldn't answer, they'd either assume they had asked a bad question or that I was too smart or busy to concern myself with such a foolish matter. One of the perks of earning credentials is gaining permission to know nothing. This privilege is rarely afforded to those who aren't protected by plaques, titles, certificates, or initials strung behind the last name. The second advantage is what I call the do ask, don't tell policy. In all fields where credentials are issued, exclusiveness is either formally taught or at the very least informally modeled. Most educators and helping professionals, therapists, physicians, social workers, clergy, etc., have been trained to extract information from reluctant consumers while sharing as little as possible about their lives. The unspoken rule states the greater the credentials and status, the more you're allowed to know about others and the less you have to reveal about yourself. Think about it. Your doctor may know your sexual history, your weight, and how many bowel movements you have per week. Yet it's questionable for you to ask if they're married or have kids. Many professions will quite back and say, we aren't talking about me. That's not relevant. Here are 4 examples. When I got pregnant, rather than going to the doctor and getting prenatal care, I waited until I was 6 months pregnant. I waited until it was too late for me not to be pregnant anymore. I was so afraid the doctor was going to say, you're too fat to have a baby. You shouldn't be pregnant. It scared me, and I was so ashamed that I just waited and waited. I can't believe I put myself or my baby at risk because I was so humiliated about my weight. I just hate doctors. Next example. My daughter died of cancer when she was 6. My preacher said that I was being selfish by grieving her death because she was in a better place. She was with God. He's a very smart and educated man, but I think what he said was cruel. It made me hate him, it made me hate my church, and it made me hate God. I still hate the preacher, I still don't go to the church, and I'm working on things with God. But how dare somebody shame you about grieving the death of your own child? No collar, no degree should allow you to do that. Do you have any idea how many years it took me to get over the shame of being sad? I'm allowed to grieve. Part of me will always grieve. What he said was a terrible, terrible injustice. He took advantage of his position. The next example. The very first time my son got an ear infection, my pediatrician said, well, what's it going to be, your career or your son's hearing? Only a doctor would feel entitled to say something like that. I asked him if his kids went to daycare, and he said, my kids aren't in the doctor's office with an ear infection. You resent them for acting so much better than everyone else, yet you totally depend on them. Next example. I was 58 when I went back to graduate school. I didn't even know how to email or use a computer. The last time I was in school, we thought a raceable bond was revolutionary. I knew it would be intimidating, but when I'm in class, I turn into a bumbling idiot. If I want to ask a question or make a point, I trip all over myself, not because of the other students, but because of these young professors. They make me so nervous. A few of them are younger than my kids. I hate feeling foolish in front of them. The third advantage of the credentials is the assumption of objectivity. Most credentialed professionals do indeed receive some type of training regarding objectivity, but there is ongoing debate on what is truly achievable. Some are taught that objectivity is possible, and they are trained to try to replace their personal lens with professional lens when they are with clients or patients. Others, including me, are taught that pure objectivity does not exist and that people can't ever completely put away their personal lens. We are trained instead to understand that the biases and power of our experiences so we understand how they might affect our interactions with clients. We believe this is the most ethical way to work with clients. In my experience, the most serious threat to objectivity is the very belief that pure objectivity and value neutrality exist. I have greater trust in those who question objectivity and who believe that people, values, and experience influence our research practice. They are the ones who make the greatest effort to present their opinions in the appropriate context. When we interview doctors, therapists, and other credentials professionals, we can't assume objectivity. We don't have the right to infringe on their private lives, but we do have the right to understand their professional values, ethics, and their motives for working with us. This is especially true for professionals who offer advice or guidance. I want a pediatrician who supports mothers in the workforce. I want an OBGYN who shares some of my basic beliefs about pregnancy and childbirth. I want a CPA who understands my values and ethics. And I certainly want a therapist who shares my basic values about how people change. Given the power of credentials, it is easy to understand why shame often results from interactions with the credentialed. To build connections and power in these situations, we need to practice our critical awareness skills. We need to determine who benefits from our fear and shame and decide how we find support. To that end, we should not hesitate to get referrals from friends. And we must also accept that we have an absolute right to interview credentialed professionals about how they practice before we expose our most personal information or vulnerabilities. In the next chapter, we will learn about the power of reaching out. While the 4 shame resilient elements don't always happen in a particular order, I found that understanding our triggers and having some level of critical awareness about our issues makes reaching out to others less scary. This is important because, as the next chapter will demonstrate, reaching out is the single most powerful act of resilience. So that is the end of chapter 4, and I will read chapter 5 probably next Monday. It'll probably be at 10 o'clock. I just want to see how long chapter 5 is. Let's see, it's about 30 pages, a little more than 30 pages. So as always, I encourage you to come to Friday book review. We have it at 1 o'clock from 1 to 2, and we just talk about the chapter, talk about how it relates to our life or doesn't relate to our life, how we can use some of the information there to change the way that we look at our lives. So hopefully you get a chance to come to one of our book reviews. If not, just enjoy the book when we read it. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.